Hey heroes, and welcome to another amazing episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an event of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelade. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Earth in the Marvel Universe has had a long history of costumed crusaders, masked vigilantes, and superhuman champions. While sporadic examples can be found since the earliest days of humanity, there was a notable spike in the number of superheroes during the Second World War. Their numbers waned again in the years after the war, but eventually a new generation of heroes emerged, starting with the public debut of the Fantastic Four. The FF were quickly followed by the likes of the X-Men, the Avengers, and many, many more, resulting in an ever-expanding population of superheroes. This, true believers, is what is referred to as the Marvel Age of Heroes, a period of time that has continued to this very day. However, if you've watched my video on the Sliding Timescale, then you'll already know that history isn't exactly fixed, and the start date of the Marvel Age is shifted forward in time a number of decades. Or to put it more simply, depending on the story, the exact time frame of when the Fantastic Four and their contemporaries first appeared will be different, which has created an ever-widening gap of time between the heroes of the modern day and their predecessors from World War II. For this week's video, we're going to be exploring the origins and history of one team of heroes who were active during this gap. Our tale begins in 1947, when an alien vessel from the Skrull Empire traveled to Earth, where it had a heated encounter with a US Air Force test flight and crash-landed in the American Southwest. The two Skrulls aboard the vessel, Lieutenant Velmax and Commander Zune, survived the crash and disembarked, only to be spotted by a drunken, gun-wielding local by the name of Jacob Scott, who opened fire on the alien invaders. While Zune was shot and injured, Velmax used his people's natural shape-shifting ability to frighten Scott away. Furthermore, the human crashed his truck nearby and died in the impact, allowing Velmax to both dispose of his body and to steal his identification papers. After that, Velmax sealed Commander Zune in a Skrull medical pod so that he could heal, and when military forces inevitably arrived to investigate, Velmax impersonated Jacob Scott, claiming that he had been attacked by evil aliens who dissolved after he'd shot them. Naturally, the Skrull ship was confiscated by the government, as was the medical pod containing Zune. Fortunately for Velmax, he quickly realized that Scott would make a perfect cover identity, as he was a distinguished Army veteran with no immediate family. Hoping to one day reach a position in which he could find his impounded starship, the phony Jacob Scott embarked upon a political career, eventually becoming an agent for the NSA. However, he ultimately learned that pieces of the vessel had been shipped to various facilities, leaving him effectively stranded on Earth. Meanwhile, Zune recovered from his injuries and, finding himself in a human laboratory, set fire to the facility and escaped unseen. Velmax subsequently learned of the fire in the lab, but with the med pod destroyed and no mention of the entity inside, he assumed that his commander had perished in the blaze. Over the following years, as Velmax continued to live as Jacob Scott, he slowly became a true ally to humanity. For the next part of our tale, however, we must introduce several other individuals, starting with a man by the name of Robert William Payne. An American in his mid-20s during the Second World War, Payne worked as a covert operative for the Allies, and notably clashed with a Nazi agent known simply as Rumor. Seeking further adventure after the war, he became a costumed crime fighter known as the Black Fox, and was primarily active in the Chicago area. Next, we'll briefly turn our attention to a man named William Burnside, who was so obsessed with Captain America that he legally changed his name to Stephen Rogers and underwent cosmetic surgery to look more like the legendary hero. Now, we could actually dedicate an entire video to his ignominious career, and maybe we will someday, but for now, the relevant thing is that in 1953, Burnside used an incomplete variant of the super soldier serum to become an unauthorized Captain America alongside a young man named Jack Monroe, who adopted the costume and identity of Bucky Barnes. However, Burnside and Monroe never received the Vita Ray treatment necessary to stabilize the serum, causing them to grow increasingly paranoid and aggressive. By 1955, they were accusing minorities of being affiliated with communists and attacking innocent American civilians until they were apprehended by the authorities and placed into cryogenic suspension by a top-secret government program called Deep Freeze, which was under the purview of NSA agent Jacob Scott. This brings us to the next person we need to talk about, Patrick Carney. Born in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, Pat Carney was a celebrated football player in his college days, but graduated to become an engineer and was eventually assigned to work at the Deep Freeze program. Once there, he was shocked to see what appeared to be Captain America and Bucky preserved in suspended animation, but was quickly informed that these two were imposters who had gone mad. Despite what had happened with Burnside and Monroe, Carney suggested to his superior that the role of Captain America be passed on to someone new, though he didn't feel worthy of it himself. Funnily enough, that suggestion was passed on to Agent Scott, who briefly considered adopting the role himself before deciding against the idea, reminding himself that he was a Skrull and not really an American. Carney, meanwhile, was inspired to create a masked persona of his own and began to brainstorm names, including the Yankee Clipper, which was previously used by the celebrated baseball player Joe DiMaggio. As he was driving home from work, however, a wounded woman appeared in front of him in a flash of light. When Carney got out to investigate, the woman, Dr. Cassandra Locke, recognized him as the Yankee Clipper and explained that she was a time traveler from the 22nd century. She told Carney that in her future there was an alien race, the Skrulls, that were planning to subjugate mankind under the guise of a peace mission, and that she had been jumping through time to gather information that would expose their schemes. She intended on planting the information on the lunar lander in 1969, where it would be safe until it could be retrieved in her own time. However, as she jumped through the 20th century, an ill-fated trip to 1961 put her in the midst of a conflict with the notorious Asian criminal Plan Chu, known in the West as the Yellow Claw, resulting in her getting caught up in an explosion that destroyed the Claw's base, leaving Locke badly burned. Carney attempted to get the injured Locke to a hospital, but she was a black woman and this was 1955, and so by the time he found someone that would treat her, it was too late to save her life. Before she died, she mused that time was a circle and left her belt to Patrick Carney, trusting him to do the right thing with it and to complete her mission. Donning the belt, Carney found that the future technology built into the device increased his already impressive strength, pushing it to superhuman levels. Thus, he designed a Captain America-inspired costume and became a masked superhero, naturally adopting the name Yankee Clipper. Over the following 3 years, he had a number of adventures, during which he met a woman named Beverly who joined him as his partner in danger, Liberty Girl. Next, however, we'll turn our attention towards a member of the virtually immortal Eternal race, Makkari, who possesses incredible superhuman speed. Now, we've talked in depth about the Eternals before, so refer to that video for all the details, but they were created roughly 1 million years ago alongside a monstrous offshoot of humanity known as the Deviants. In the 1940s, the Prime Eternal Zuras tasked Makkari with opposing the deviant warlord Crow, and Makkari operated under aliases such as Mercury and Hurricane during the Second World War. In the 1950s, however, when superheroes fell out of fashion, Makkari instead embedded himself as an NSA agent named Jake Curtis. And so when Crow then embarked on a scheme to attack and destabilize humanity by unleashing large, genetically engineered creatures, Makkari, under the guise of Agent Curtis, assembled a team of monster hunters capable of opposing him. That group included Dr. Anthony Druid, an author and occult expert who had received mystical abilities from a Tibetan Lama. Now, I will note that said Lama was actually the Earth's Sorcerer Supreme, Yao, the Ancient One, in disguise, who at the time was secretly testing his ability to transfer a portion of his own mystic power to another. Makkari also recruited a Wakandan woman named Zawadi, who in her youth partook of the heart-shaped herb that was traditionally used to empower the various Black Panthers, and Ulysses Bloodstone, a 10,000-year-old adventurer who was rendered virtually immortal by the fragment of the mystical blood gem lodged in his chest. Some of you may also remember him as the father of Elsa Bloodstone. In 1956, this team of monster hunters thwarted Crow's schemes, and the trio of recruits ultimately learned that the one who had recruited them was actually the Eternal Makkari. They stayed together for at least 2 years, during which time they also recruited the Atlantean human hybrid Namora, a cousin to the similarly powered Namor the Submariner. Makkari, meanwhile, adopted other aliases, and in 1958 he was known as NSA Agent Makkari, and worked under the aforementioned Agent Jacob Scott, who I remind you was secretly the Skrull Velmax. It was also in 1958 that the other Skrull, Commander Zune, located the bulk of their vessel in a government facility on Long Island and hired a pair of costumed mercenaries, Blackjack and Scythe, to help him infiltrate the building. Learning of this security breach but unaware that Zune was involved, Jacob Scott recruited the Black Fox, the Yankee Clipper, and Liberty Girl to help him investigate. While all that was going on, the government scientists' attempts to study the alien technology had caused an accident that transformed one of their number, Dr. Schreiber, into a monstrous creature, which also drew the attention of Makkari and his monster hunters. In the end, Schreiber reverted to human form, and the monster hunters helped the other heroes defeat the hired mercenaries. However, Zune escaped without anyone discovering his true identity or motives. During that whole battle, however, Jacob Scott was hit with an attack that caused him to partially revert back to his original Skrullian form for a moment, and he quickly concocted a lie about an alien ray affecting him in some strange way, forcing himself to remain in human form before passing out. In the aftermath of that whole incident, the monster hunters departed, eventually going their separate ways, while the Yankee Clipper attempted to help Scott by bringing in an enigmatic healer that he'd met in the Caribbean. This mysterious woman, who would be known simply as a Nightingale, used her healing powers to awaken Scott, but in doing so caused him to briefly lose control of his shape-shifting abilities. After regaining his faculties and control over his form, Scott maintained his cover by making it seem as though his experience at the lab had endowed him with shape-shifting abilities, and the Black Fox granted him a new moniker, dubbing him Effigy. The Yankee Clipper then proposed that they all band together to form a new superhero team, the First Line, as in the first line of defense. But the Black Fox, 38 years old by this point, intended on retiring from masked adventuring and marrying his longtime girlfriend Miriam. After he returned to Chicago, however, he faced a vampiric supervillain called Nocturne who took Miriam hostage and sadistically killed her in front of the Black Fox. In the wake of that incident, the Black Fox became even more driven in his war on crime, and ultimately took up the Clippers' offer to become a member of the First Line, alongside Effigy, Nightingale, and Liberty Girl. Over the following years, the group has had many members come and go, not all of which have been fully documented or identified. By 1961, the Yankee Clippers' younger brother, Tim Carney, began aiding the team as Kid Justice, and within 2 years he had become a full-fledged member of the team, later changing his name to Mr. Justice. Meanwhile, a seemingly youthful but nonetheless ancient Eternal known as Pixie also sought to pursue a career in superheroics, and in 1961 she unsuccessfully attempted to form a partnership with an acrobatic adventurer known as the Hipster. Now, the Hipster later changed his name to Captain Hip and instead partnered with his wife, Sunshine, and while he was an occasional ally to the First Line, he declined more than one offer to formally join, and eventually retired when he and Sunshine found out that they were going to have a baby. Pixie, meanwhile, met an indigenous Canadian from the Northwest Territories named Sam Matanabe, who had superhuman strength. With some eager encouragement from Pixie, Matanabe became the partner that she wanted and took the code name Oxbow. In 1963, the First Line experienced their first real loss during an encounter with the Skrull commander Zune, who at the time was calling himself Chimera and trying to steal technology from Stark Industries. In the ensuing battle, Chimera grievously injured Liberty Girl, who subsequently died as a result. Velmax, as Effigy, ultimately succeeded in killing Chimera, and didn't realize until after he'd struck the fatal blow that his foe was actually his former commander. Meanwhile, Cassandra Locke materialized nearby while she was still in the midst of her journey backwards through time. Realizing that this was Cassandra from before she suffered the injuries that claimed her life, the Yankee Clipper tried to warn her about her ultimate fate, but when the temporal duplicate time belts they wore came into close proximity, both of them activated simultaneously, throwing Locke back into the time stream, while the Yankee Clipper was flung roughly 20 years into the future. In the years that followed, a number of other heroes joined the First Line, including Pixie and Oxbow, Rebound, whose origins and power set are still not well documented, and Frank, who may or may not be the infamous monster created by Victor Frankenstein. Pixie also invited her fellow Eternal Makkari to join, who did so under the masked identity of Major Mercury. In 1967, the team briefly joined forces with the mighty Thor and apprehended the Black Fox's old adversary, Rumor. Thor declined an offer to join them, instead returning home to Asgard, but sometime over the next 2 years the team recruited a flame-powered hero named Firefall and their former foe, the mercenary Blackjack. By 1969, Effigy had finished reassembling and repairing his old Skrullian saucer craft, and in July of that year, he led the team on a mission to prevent other Skrull invaders from interfering with the Apollo 11 moon landing. On that mission, the Skrulls hired several human supervillains to fight for them, including Blackjack's former flame, Positron, who was captured by the First Line when her allies abandoned her. The moon landing, of course, was a success, and Mr. Justice pulled strings to complete his brother's mission by ensuring that Cassandra Locke's information on the future Skrull invasion was safely hidden on the lunar lander. In the wake of that mission, having foiled a plot from his own people, Effigy, aka Jacob Scott, aka Velmax, fully accepted that the Earth, and more specifically, the United States, was his home now. In the early 1970s, the First Line gained several more members, including Katyusha, Reflex, Vulcan, and Knight Templar. However, things took a turn in 1972 when the team refused to help President Richard Nixon suppress the Watergate scandal. As a result, the first line lost their government privileges and ultimately disbanded, while Effigy covertly gave information to reporter Bob Woodward, becoming the secret informant known as Deep Throat. At the same time in Detroit, a man named Russell, who was originally from West Texas, was working on an armored battlesuit called Flat Iron, and so the emergence of new heroes was inevitable. By this point, the Ancient One had also trained his true protege, Dr. Stephen Strange, and sometime in the 1970s, Strange joined forces with Pixie and Black Fox to oppose Fox's vampiric nemesis, Nocturne, and to prevent the release of the imprisoned alchemist Diablo. Meanwhile, the former supervillain Blackjack convinced his old flame Positron to reform as well, and the two got back together. Elsewhere, in 1975, there was a brilliant scientist named William Carmody, who by one account was secretly a member of the Eternal race that was hiding among mankind by inhabiting a weaker human body. Inspired by the decades-old secret work of one Charles Lindbergh, Carmody developed a device he called the artificial heart, which could keep an organic brain alive even after it was removed from its original body. Then, in 1980, Carmody was found by agents of his enemy, the self-proclaimed Emperor of Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, who fatally shot Carmody and abducted his daughter Mary. Before his human body died, however, Carmody had his lab assistant, Jim Fitzpatrick, remove his eternal brain and place it in one of his so-called artificial hearts, allowing him to persist in that form. Furthermore, he was connected to a device called a telepathy receptor that granted him a number of mental abilities, which the Eternal Brain subsequently used to defeat Ulaanbaatar and his gangster associate Peg Leg Martin, rescuing Mary in the process. Finding this new form strangely liberating, albeit lacking in mobility, Carmody decided to continue living as the Eternal Brain, and Jim Fitzpatrick subsequently built him a prototype robot body. That same year, there was an incident in which the government of the North African nation of Halwan, believing that the United States were aiding Halwani Republican movements, took several American diplomats hostage. Mr. Justice was subsequently sent in to rescue the hostages, but wound up being taken prisoner as well. In response, Effigy once again assembled the first line, gathering Nightingale, Positron, Reflex, Flat Iron, Pixie, Oxbow, Blackjack, Black Fox, and the Eternal Brain. But while this new incarnation of the first line launched an attack on Halwan, a CIA team led by Nick Fury covertly infiltrated the capital city of Camillabad with the mission of retrieving the captive diplomats. However, things went sideways on both fronts, and Blackjack was killed in the ensuing conflict. Furthermore, by the time they all got there, Mr. Justice had already convinced a member of the Halwani royal family named Khadija to defect to the west and help both he and the hostages escape. In the wake of that whole mess, the Halwani regime began to destabilize, and the Black Fox accused Effigy of manipulating the whole situation by using the first line as little more than a diversion. Enraged and disillusioned, the Fox quit the team once and for all, and shortly thereafter retired from superheroics altogether. Setting up a headquarters at the Living Brains Carmody Institute on the coast of Maine, the rest of the first line remained a loose-knit group over the following few years, with several new members added. This included Walkabout, a sentient robot, Rapunzel, who could control her own hair follicles, Morph, who shouldn't be confused with the mutant Kevin Sidney, and Yeti, an animalistic member of the hidden Inhuman race. The Eternal Brain, meanwhile, transferred his consciousness into a fetal homunculus that was ultimately placed inside the robotic Walkabout, linking the two together. After an encounter with Crow's deviants, this version of the team also met and briefly spoke with Dr. Cassandra Locke while she was in the midst of her journey through time. Sometime later, there was some sort of unspecified tragedy involving Rapunzel, in which the Yeti lost control of himself and exiled himself into the mountains in shame. Meanwhile, in the mid-1980s, the Yankee Clipper resurfaced, having been thrown to that point in time after his previous encounter with Cassandra Locke. He met with his brother, Mr. Justice, and the now retired Black Fox, letting them both know that he was still alive, and the Eternal Pixie helped him cope with the experience of finding himself in a world that was rapidly changing around him. He also began studying the time belt, and after about a year of doing so, he decided to deliberately jump forward once again. Some years later, as the Marvel Age drew closer, a Skrull named Zancor was sent to Earth to prepare for an upcoming invasion. Unfortunately for him, Zancor inadvertently crashed and suffered from amnesia, causing him to believe that he was human due to false memories that had been implanted to aid with his infiltration. As a result, Zancor attempted to warn humanity of the crashed alien vessel he'd supposedly found, but in the end his true identity was ironically uncovered by a young Reed Richards, some years before he became Mr. Fantastic. Zancor was then turned over to the First Line, who began planning countermeasures for the inevitable Skrull invasion. At the same time, Zancor's backup, a female spy named Korea, found Yeti hidden in the Himalayas and befriended him, recruiting him to their side. Sure enough, the Skrull invasion soon came as their warships gathered above the surface of the moon. However, with what he'd learned from Zancor, Effigy was able to gather nearly everyone who had ever been a member of the First Line, leading them into a battle that most of Earth never knew was happening. This conflict was observed, however, by Uatu the Watcher and Dr. Cassandra Locke, who from her point of view was relatively early in her journey through time. In the end, the First Line were victorious, but at great cost, as Effigy and Pixie successfully triggered a chain reaction that destroyed the invading fleet. By the time the dust settled, nearly every member of the First Line had been killed, including Effigy, and the Marvel Universe had lost an entire generation of heroes. However, Pixie, as a nigh-immortal Eternal, survived the explosions and made it back to Earth. The inhuman Yeti, meanwhile, fled from the destruction with an escape pod and took the corpse of his Skrull ally Korea with him into the mountains, where he remained hidden for years. While he was there, the Marvel Age dawned and a new generation of heroes began to emerge, starting with the world-famous Fantastic Four. In one of their earliest outings, the FF were impersonated by a group of Skrulls as part of another invasion attempt, but the heroes ultimately uncovered the alien plot and cleared their names. It was around this time that Pat Carney, the Yankee Clipper, emerged from his last time jump, and after meeting with Pixie and her ally Icarus, another Eternal who at the time was living among humanity, Carney learned that he had missed the First Line's final battle, and that new heroes had risen to thwart further Skrull invasions. As such, he decided that with the First Line gone and largely forgotten, the time of the Yankee Clipper was over, and Pat Carney officially retired, while Pixie promised to complete the mission that Cassandra Locke had told him about in 1955. Sure enough, 200 years later, in Cassandra Locke's future timeline, designated Reality 700, Pixie retrieved the information that Locke had collected from her journey through time, which was still hidden on the Apollo 11 lunar lander, and presented it to mankind, preventing yet another attempted Skrull invasion. And so, true believers, that brings us to the end of this week's story, the tale of a generation of heroes that has largely been forgotten, but nonetheless gave their lives to save the Earth. Alright heroes, that's all I've got for you this week, but thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this weekend, so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!